I'm Alexis, and this is the Whatcha Watchin pod. And today I am joined by a very special guest because we're going to be talking all about movie ratings. And the reason we're talking about movie ratings is because she made this amazing series of TikTok videos that I absolutely love that are all about the rating system and how that all works. So please welcome actress, filmmaker, podcaster, one of my favorite movie TikTokers, Kt Baldassaro is here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. Yeah. So you were very much the inspiration for this. I saw your videos and I've always, it's one of those things, even when I was sort of in film school, I was always really fascinated by the movie rating system and how sometimes very arbitrary it feels. So seeing your videos, you made a really great one about the origin of the PG-13 rating, which I feel like a lot of people probably don't know. So that was really great. So, in your sort of research for those videos, was there anything really interesting that you found out or that you were kind of like, wow, I'm surprised to know about this?
It just keeps getting like a further and further rabbit hole the more I keep peeling the onion skin back. Like even today I was like, let me look a little more. And I was like, no, what? And like I kind of focused in on when the MPAA starts to exist in '68. And if you guys are interested in Hays Code stuff, there's a wonderful film talker called Lobby Intros, Harry, and he does a documentary about the Hays Code that I highly recommend because it kind of does the stuff before we're going to talk about right now. But what I thought was the most interesting is the fact that it's not technically law except for one place.
Yeah. Such a bizarre, like, it's like, well, it's a sort of a industry self-regulating, except in this one incident. Yeah, which is so bizarre. And that's where you start to get into like, different rules for different things. And also just how things are enforced can vary so widely from place to place.
Oh my God. Yeah. And that's part of what winds up creating the MPAA to begin with, because there's even the Hays Code, there was like decency laws that were varying from state to state, and it was getting so muddled that the MPAA stepped in and was like, what if we do this self-regulatory thing that's not even really law, it's just kind of like a suggestion, and everybody calms down and everybody can kind of make movies. And like it seems like they were being nice, but it was definitely self-indulgent, and they wanted to say what was right and what was not right, and it totally became censorship.
Yeah. I remember in school watching Gold Diggers of 1933 and then Gold Diggers of 1935, and it's really interesting to see the sort of pre-Hays Code and then post-Hays Code where you're like, wow, these are like noticeable differences between these things. And then I think when we get into the 60s, it's like cinema itself starts to change so much. We start to get like, less of the kind of like good old Hollywood musical, and we get stuff like Bonnie and Clyde and things where it's like, what do we do here? These are not family friendly movies, but the code is kind of irrelevant now. And how do we make it where there's more variations and this is open to more people? So I always find that very interesting. And then when they went from GP to PG, which I don't know why it wasn't just PG in the first place, and then throwing the PG-13 in there. There's so many, like, again, these are the kind of weird decisions where you're like, it doesn't really make sense. This is that sort of self-regulating, like, well, we'll do it so the government doesn't do it kind of thing, where you go, right, but like, who decides this? And how, like, you have somebody like Steven Spielberg who has the juice to be like, actually, I'd like my movie to not be R-rated. And everyone goes, well, okay. Yeah.
Talk to my friend Jack Valenti in charge of the whole thing. Like, wow, what a pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah, I recently did an episode all about the South Park movie. And that was so notoriously one of those ones where it was like, no, NC-17. And it's fascinating to look at, okay, is it language? Is it sexual content? Is it violence? Like, where is the line for these things? These are just little sort of cardboard animated characters, and yet it's filled with cussing, so therefore NC-17 or R or something. And again, it feels so arbitrary.
Oh my God. And that's a really good film to look at because it's one of the first cases where the MPAA comes back with specifics. Prior to that, even with Trey and Matt's Orgasmo, they had gotten, again, an NC-17, and they asked why. And they said, look, if we told you why or gave you specific reasons, that would be akin to censorship because we would be telling you how to change your movie, and we don't want to touch your art. the South Park, and they were like, this, when they do this, all of this. And it's like, oh, okay. So now you're kind of okay with censorship. And there's a fantastic documentary called This Film Is Not Yet Rated. And they talked to a couple of people who used to have these jobs, and they said that they would feel as though the film, it read better when they edited it to meet the standards that they had. Like they had made it a better film. Like, oh my,
Yeah.
self-serving much?
It just becomes this weird like editorializing of a movie where you're kind of like, well, actually we're benefiting you by making you change your artistic vision to be what we think is better. And it's like, well, you have no skin in the game. You're not involved in this in any way, but they just come through with these decisions. And that's such a good point that you made about the specifics. Cause I think too, Orgasmo is like an independent kind of thing. I think a lot of the time when you have these independent films where suddenly it's like, oh, no, we couldn't possibly tell you what went wrong here, what you need to change. But then you have a sort of a studio film, and then suddenly it's like, actually, we need you to cut 30 seconds of this. We need you to do this. And that just goes to show again how it's like, this is such an industry inside kind of thing, as opposed to an actual like regulatory body that is here to make fair decisions,
And it's one of the few, like, there are regulatory bodies in every single country. Every single one of them has a different one. And that's why when we start to get to streaming, this conversation gets crazy. But like, we're the only one where it's anonymous. They don't even tell us how many. It's 8 to 13. And they're supposed to be parents that represent American parents. But again, if you watch that documentary, they can show side by side films that came out in the same exact year that have an inherent bias towards female pleasure or anything where it's a non-heteronormative story. And so like this starts to bring up to mind a really great question. Why not just have government regulation? Because if we had government regulation, there would be a judicial board to which you could appeal, and there would be specific regulations. So why would we not want to do that? And you got to look to McCarthyism. When that came out, they said two questions where most people were asked. Were you part of the Communist Party? Like, who's going to answer that? Like, did you murder the guy? Yeah, I totally murdered the guy. And then, are you part of the writers union? And if you got banned, the government like banned you from making films or making art. And so the MPA said, look, we're not even law. We would never ban a movie or ban a director. So if you stay with us, yeah, maybe we're going to be like, hey, don't have a gay scene. But we won't be like, hey, don't ever make art again, and you can't. And so that's kind of why no government regulation.
Yeah, it's kind of like, oh, well, we're the nice censorship, like,
the devil you know.
Exactly. Yeah. And then you can kind of be like, you can get more or less strict over the years, depending on culture and all that. And like a lot of the time it's more strict, and it's kind of like, well, how are these decisions being made? It's not transparent. It's like there's no real formula to it. A lot of it is who you are as a filmmaker or how much money your film cost or something. And it's like, these are the parts where you start to go, so this is just some person's decision. This is completely arbitrary. This is not like based on anything really,
There's no training into it. Like, and I think the salary is $30,000 a year for full-time work. So it's not even like a cushy job.
Yeah. Exactly. What's so interesting is, you mentioned streaming, but I think like in the old days of movie theaters being the only place you could watch a movie, these ratings really mattered. I remember, like an NC-17 movie, that was the kiss of death. It was like, well, you get an NC-17, you're not going to make any money. Nobody's going to show this movie. No one's going to be able to go see it. And it's interesting how that has evolved with streaming. I feel like now, maybe DVD kind of started it because we used to get the unrated cut of a movie a lot of the time with DVDs.
That's true.
And then I think now it's just kind of like, oh, they still rate movies? Like, I feel like people don't pay attention to it at all anymore.
Oh my God. And it's also a real big marketing factor. Like if you're getting distribution through, say, even if you're an independent and you get picked up by like Lionsgate, and they're like, yeah, we're going to give you a marketing budget. But then you get an NC-17, they're like, we're not going to give you that big of a marketing budget. And like, I started to look into streaming and ratings, and like, so when something's on TV, it's a different regulatory board. It's basically the station itself. So HBO
Hmm.
gets to be like, Game of Thrones is rated this because of this. And
Hmm.
like that's pretty awesome. That's a lot of power to have. But also like they don't make anywhere near as much money as movies
Oh
that come
yeah,
out in theaters do.
for sure. Yeah,
And the actors get hard screwed. I mean, that's a major tenet of what the last strike was about, was the
absolutely.
residuals on that kind of streaming stuff. So it gets really, really murky. And the funnest fact that I found out today is that last year, not a single G movie was released in theatrical box office. Like,
Really?
no. And since 2016, NC-17 films have made more of the market share than G films, which have made
Get
almost
out of
less than
here.
like 0.2.
That's so crazy. Yeah, I know the PG-13 is like the most profitable rating, but it
Oh
is
yeah.
interesting that G would have fallen from grace so much. I think it's just people are like, this is like straight up a kids movie. But it's interesting. I
Mm-hmm.
wonder too if kids movies at this point are aiming for the PG-13, even if it's like it's technically a G, but
That's
we want
interesting.
that
Yeah.
profitable PG-13 so that people don't think, it's just a baby movie, this is just for
Mm-hmm.
kids.
Well, even last year, PG took over from R. It's one of the few times, like, every once in a while, PG will take over from R and get a larger market share. It was only 5% lower than PG-13. So we're really seeing that like people want to go to the theater as a large group and do an activity out of it, as opposed to like, I just want to see the movie itself. I think the turnaround is like less than 60 days. So you can kind of just wait for most stuff, really, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting too because I feel like all the Marvel movies are PG-13, and which
Yes.
would maybe skewing the data a little bit in terms of those are so profitable, But then it's really interesting now with something like Deadpool and Wolverine coming out, where we have a Marvel movie that's R-rated that's also breaking all these records and making all this money for an R-rated movie. I'll be curious if that sort of opens up a new area of a kind of not like a family friendly movie, but a movie that I don't think parents are going to be like horrified to take like their 13-year-old kid to, even though it's filled with language and things like that, because it gets the kind of, well, it's a comic book movie. It gets a pass. It's fine kind of thing.
And it's exactly what you should be expecting out of that particular character. It is
Totally.
also a really, really weird point in history right now to ask this question,
Yes.
because if you have read any of the portions of, oh God, it's Project 2025,
Oh
the
God, yeah.
legislation that it has specific media censorship aspects to it, to such a degree that it categorizes any transgender activity or ideology as pornography.
Wild. The way,
Wild.
like, and this is again, this goes back to like the censorship of the Hays Code, where it's like these decisions that are these like cultural decisions, but it's like, do they reflect the actual views of the culture? Or are they just
Mhm.
the censorship body's views, or like a very certain group of people's very conservative views?
And so this keeps happening on and off, and that's why you have people like Jack Valenti and William Hayes in charge of the MPAs, because they were government based lobbyists, Washington men who knew how to deal with this. Because every once in a while, a religious group is going to come up against the MPAA and say, you're not doing enough. And that's
Mm-hmm.
happening right now. And then the MPAA has either one of two responses. They used to do a like, okay, so we'll put somebody on the board who cares more about Christianity. Or they'll be like, too bad, we're gonna like add some more ratings and see if you care. So like what might happen right now, given that Project 2025 wants to step out, and then there's also the MPAA, which has been our actual group of regulatory people.
Yeah.
Who knows?
It's a very, especially, I mean, just the state of movies in general is so strange right now with streaming and theaters, and then with the end of the sort of regulations that a studio can't own a theater, which was a part of the original kind of rating thing anyway, was, hey, if you're a studio, you put whatever you want in the theater that you own. Wait, studios can't own theaters. Now it's up to the distributors, but now what if the studios are the it's like everything just gets so complicated, and it's weird how it's like, very George Lucas, it's like poetry, it rhymes. like we're just kind of going back to these same weird things that we've done in the past with
Yeah.
like weird regulations from weird conservative groups. And then, on top of that, then we'll get, cool independent cinema that wants to break the sort of mold and be kind of like what we had in the 60s. It's just like, oh, we just do it again over and over and over.
Sure. I mean, we got some great films out of the last time we did that. Like, have some art house basement cinemas reopen, but
Totally.
it is hard to not sit back and look at the timeline and be like, oh, fuck, we're here in the timeline again. Damn
Seriously,
it.
like, oh, we're doing this. We're at this part again. Like, I want to get to the cool part where we're like, we're getting masterpieces like Jaws and stuff. Like, I want to get where we're getting big blockbuster movies that are also really good movies, and we don't have to worry about all these things. Like, I want to be in the post like 60s Renaissance era.
Absolutely. So I hope that there aren't any kind of boycott backlashes against Deadpool for that. This particular, like, it's art.
Seriously.
It tells you what's happening.
Yeah, exactly. They're pretty upfront about it. And there are 2 previous Deadpool movies that you could look at as examples of like, yep, there's going to be a lot of swearing and gore and blood and stuff in this,
But that will affect its market share in Tennessee though, because
Totally.
you can't go and see it if you're not with your parents. If you're under 18, that's just the law. So strange. Oh man.
So wild. Now, so you're a huge horror fan. Do you find, I mean, obviously horror movies, I feel like end up getting the brunt of this so much because it's like, oh, there's blood in it. A lot of the time there'll be sex in it. And it's like, oh, those are things that we immediately, we certainly couldn't show people that, even if it's like light. I always find it interesting, like where they draw the line in terms of those big categories. Like violence is such its own thing, and usually violence is like weirdly okay. Sexual content is where they start to get into like, oh no, we must regulate this. Like, full frontal nudity, absolutely not. Meanwhile, like 80 million people getting their heads chopped off, well, that's different. And then language, I feel like those are kind of like the big 3 that they look for when they're making these decisions. Have there been any recent horror movies that you've seen that maybe have received an R that you're like, it's not really an R, but it's getting an R just because it's horror?
Oh yeah, and I think that like it's a double-edged sword. I think when you first start with horror in its very essence is deviant, and anything that is deviant is against the code, so they're going to give it the highest rating they can give it. And then there's often a lot of sexuality, and the sexuality will be deviant, and that's going to get you a higher rating. And then you start to get into our time period where like all of the good horror movies have been rated R because of what I just said. So if you're going to pretend to be a good horror movie, you better be rated R, even with our standards today. Or else I'm not gonna go see a PG-13 horror movie that's for children. And you're like, what kind of horror movie is for children?
Yeah, it's so true.
I guess Gremlins maybe.
Gremlins is for everybody though.
It's true.
But yeah, it's so true. It's like certain categories, I feel like they wear the rating. The rating is a badge of honor. And I feel like with horror, it's like you want an R rating for your horror movie. You got a PG-13 horror movie, immediately people are like, it's not going to be scary. It's definitely going to feel like something for kids. This is going to be very like, sort of Goosebumps vibes. This is not going to be like real horror.
Oh yeah, especially because in 2009 they changed the rules for trailers. So when you're watching a trailer, it had to be like green band, yellow band, or red band. And yellow band meant that it was like appropriate for what you were viewing. And now they changed the rules on green band, where as long as it's shown with other movies that would be similar in rating, it's green band. So when you're sitting with a horror movie, you want to see like a green band horror movie. But now they're also like, we'll throw in the red ones too. And now if you can get a red band horror trailer, then people are like, oh my God, I gotta see that. Plus, like you said earlier, you can release the unrated on your DVD, and that sells your DVDs because make more money on ticket sales in the back end.
It's the balance of art and business is such the film industry.
Ratings are not about saving children from anything. They are all about money and
Exactly.
placating religious groups in the United States. To say
Exactly.
otherwise is juvenile.
It's so true. It's like, this is not about like a moral high ground. This is about like who will be the least pissed off out of this giant group of people.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up, I'm trying to think, I was thinking about, our exposure to R-rated movies or whatever, or, I always think about like, what was the first R-rated movie you saw? And I think another question that I'm interested in too is, what was the first movie that you saw that you were like, I think this is too old for me, or like, wait, I think this is too mature? Because I feel like we've all had that point in our lives when we were kids where we're like, I can handle it. It's an R-rated movie, or like it's a horror movie, or it's whatever. I'll be fine. And then you like are like, oh my God, I definitely should not have watched this.
So I ruminated on that one really long because I'm 39. I'm born right when PG-13 is made. And I grew up my parents were artists in Greenwich Village in New York City. My dad was a folk musician. They met watching horror movies in like old theaters. They don't care about ratings at all. When we had a Blockbuster card, they had the thing written on the account that said, let them take whatever they want. It doesn't matter, because they would send us to get movies for them as well. And they weren't going to watch kids' movies with us. We were just going to watch with them. So like, I definitely was just watching R-rated movies very early on. But I do remember the first time somebody else said, no, you cannot watch this movie. And it was From Dusk Till Dawn from Quentin Tarantino.
Oh, nice.
So that came out. So I'm watching it shortly after release. So I'm about 11 and I'm watching it with my brother who's about 18. No parents in the room. We're just chilling watching. And it gets to like right at the beginning when Cheech Marin comes out and he goes like, pussy, puss. And my brother's like, dude, just stops the tape. And he's like, no, we're not doing this.
He's like, shut it down.
To this day, I haven't seen that movie.
That's so funny. Yeah, I think for me, I remember like a slumber party in maybe like third or fourth grade where someone brought Pet Sematary. And I remember thinking like, it's fine. We can totally watch this. Like, it's going to be like, we're watching this horror movie. It's going to be fine. And I remember like staying up the whole night in my sleeping bag being like, oh my God. And that was, I think, the first time when I went like, oh, there's a reason movies are rated certain ratings.
That is great. I got thrown out of a friend's house when I was like 15 for bringing over Deconstructing Harry, which is rated R, and they're like, "This is too adult. Get out!" So I'm like, "What are you doing? My parents are into them."
That's so funny. Yeah, I think there's something to be said for parents who are like, you'll figure it out. You'll find your own limits, and then you really do. And then when you cross one, you go, wow, okay, I've learned something today.
I can't handle Pet Sematary right now as an adult. Something
real.
about pets in horror movies, I'm like, so I'm out.
Completely. I'm the same way. Like, I can watch all sorts of gore if it's like people, but then if they're like, and an animal gets hurt, I'm immediately like, I can't watch this. I have to stop this movie. It's like the trauma is so much more.
Yeah,
intense.
I'm crying for like an hour. I'm like, what is it? And my husband's like, it was a fake dog. And I'm like, it's still.
Totally. It's so true. I think that's another thing. I think like with horror movies in particular, when you can see like a making of thing, that helps so much when you're like a kid and you can process. I did a video like a long time ago about the Thriller music video. Yes. And I remember as a little kid being like really scared of the Thriller music video. And then they would play the making of Thriller and they'd be like, look, it's this really cool like latex and prosthetics. And we've done this to be like where it inflates this thing for the werewolf transformation. And then immediately being like, now I'm okay. Now I can watch this and not be scared.
Absolutely. I like bloopers at the end of horror movies also make me feel really calm. Yeah.
Totally. It's like at some point I need it's cool to have the immersion during the movie, but then after the movie, I would like to be like completely removed from that immersion where I could see like, oh no, this is all just a production.
And I've worked on a lot of like B horror movies. So if you talk to the actors about what is happening in between some of the most horrific scenes they've shot, it is some of the most ridiculous, because you have to stay sane somehow. So we like playing weird games, having strange conversations. Often
you gotta
said
balance
is
it out.
Gross. Yeah, you're like
exactly. Well, this has been a lovely discussion, and I highly encourage people to check out your TikTok. For real, your videos on ratings are amazing, but all of your videos are amazing. The entire, you did several on long legs that are like, I immediately was like, save to favorites, like immediately. So good. So
I try not to throw too much hate, but I did have a like, we need to have a discussion.
But what I love is, you didn't like it, and it made you really creative in expressing how you didn't like it. So I feel like that's always points, if it's like, if you have a criticism of a movie, but you can do it in a really creative way, it's like, hey, some good came out of it.
Yes. I'm very good at creating out of spite.
Exactly. Sometimes it's the best motivator.
Seriously. Oh man, thank you so much. This is awesome.
Will you let everyone know where they can find you? I will put all the links and stuff in the description. But yeah, go ahead and let everybody know where they can find you and follow you.
I'm at MovieRuntime on TikTok and YouTube. And then if you go to @Little Deadly Creature, you'll find me on Instagram. Although I have like a backup account that's at MovieRuntime that links to the other one, because at MovieRuntime is just easier to remember. So that'll get you my LinkedIn tree. That'll show you everything. I'm going to be working with Movie Night Extravaganza this week. We're doing a special like Lord of the Rings thing all week. And we have the head editor for Massive, the technology used to do the crowds, coming on to talk to us. So we're going to be nerding out about how that worked, as well as just like nerding out about the whole trilogy. So like, come join me. That's all link in bio type stuff. So
great. Yeah. Well, if you're going to nerd out on anything, Lord of the Rings is the way to go. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, KT. And we will catch you in the next one. If you like this, comment, subscribe, all those YouTube-y things. And we will see you in the next episode. Bye.
See you guys there.